Hi, welcome to step 12 of our walking tour through the Bible, and we're now at chapter 19 of the book of Genesis. We're actually at one of the most famous passages in the book of Genesis, one which is famous for all the wrong reasons. It's famous largely because it has been so misinterpreted. Now, if you go back to what had happened, the previous chapter, 18, Abraham had welcomed the three strangers and really rolled out the red carpet for them. Now, two of those strangers turn up in Sodom, the city, and there they meet Lot, Abraham's nephew, who's sitting by the city gate, and he invites them into his house. And in fact, Lot behaves like the perfect gentleman, welcoming the stranger. No, they said, we shall spend the night in the square. But he pressed them so much that they went home with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking unleavened bread, and they had supper. Okay, so far so good. In other words, Lot behaves as one should. But we know, don't we, that cities are not very friendly places. We know from our own experience that people are not so welcoming and warm in cities. And in fact, cities can be rather threatening. The city of the dreadful night. I'm not sure who coined that phrase, Gotham City. I think it's the city of the dreadful night. It's actually from Batman, but I'm not sure. And no sooner had they gone to bed, the strangers in Lot's house, when the house was surrounded by the townspeople, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people without exception. Now, that cannot possibly be historically accurate. The whole town turned up, without exception, old and young. Calling out to Lot, they said, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Send them out to us so that we can have intercourse with them." That's my translation. Another translation says, so that we may abuse them. But it's pretty obvious, though all the townsmen surround the house and they say, bring them out so we can rape them. Which is extraordinary, isn't it? Now, things like this do actually happen very occasionally. Mobs do form, and mobs do surround people's houses and say, bring out those strangers you're sheltering in there so we can do whatever. We think they're spies, so we can put them on trial and then shoot them or something like that. You do get mobs who act in the most abominable way, and we've all seen this happen. So it's unusual, but it is feasible. But all the townspeople, anyway, and incidentally, they want to rape them. In other words, this contrasts very strongly with Lot's welcome to the strangers. This is the exact opposite, the polar opposite to what Lot has done. Lot's made them feel at home and so on and so forth. This lot are very, very, very hostile. Lot came out to them at the door, having shut the door behind him, said, "Please, brothers, do not be so wicked. Look, I have two daughters who are virgins. I'm ready to send them out to you for you to treat as you please, but do nothing to these men, since they are now under the protection of my roof." In other words, the guest is sacred. But, you can rape my daughters if that's what you want. In other words, the guest is so sacred that you'd do anything to protect the guest, even absurdly offer them your virgin daughters to have fun with, to rape. Now, this idea of the guest is sacred is in fact still very much a thing in the Middle East. If you remember, Saddam Hussein's family fled from Iraq at the fall of Saddam Hussein, and they took refuge in Jordan. And despite the fact that the Jordanian government didn't have any particular liking for Saddam Hussein and his government, his friends and relatives, they have lived there ever since, and they've refused to hand them over to anybody. This idea of extraditing people is very much not the Middle Eastern way of going about it. Anyway, Lot is determined not to hand over these guests to be raped, so he'll offer his daughters. He'll do anything to save the guests from being raped. "Stand back," but they retorted, "Stand back, this fellow came here as a foreigner. Now he wants to play the judge. Now we shall treat you worse than them." God, it gets worse, doesn't it? So they're now going to say, "We're going to rape you, Lot." Then they forced Lot back and moved towards him to break down the door. But the men, the visitors, reached out, pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. And they dazzled those who were at the door of the house, one and all, with a blinding light, so they could not find the doorway. So the visitors obviously have supernatural powers, and they're blinded. The men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Your sons, your daughters, and all the people in the city, take them away. For we are about to destroy this place, since the outcry to Yahweh against those ends has grown so loud." So in other words, the angels say, we're about to destroy this place because, it's a wicked place, as the townspeople have just proved. We had a suspicion it was wicked, and they've actually jumped through every hoop possible to prove that it's a completely wicked place. Now, why is Sodom therefore to be destroyed? So Lot and his family are allowed to escape, and Sodom is destroyed. Why is Sodom destroyed? Well, Sodom is not destroyed because its inhabitants are homosexual rapists. Sodom is destroyed because its inhabitants are typical city dwellers who exploit, abuse, and make use of visitors and strangers rather than treating them as proper human beings. The sin of Sodom is lack of hospitality and lack of charity. And the lack of hospitality and lack of charity is symbolized by this desire to rape the stranger. It's the worst thing you can do to a stranger. It's worse than actually killing them, isn't it? We talk about rape, or we used to talk about rape, as a fate worse than death. And therefore, the rape is a sin against the God-given precept to love the stranger, to welcome the stranger. In other words, to do what Abraham did at the Oak of Mamre, and to do what Lot did when he let the strangers into his house in the first place. And then, of course, we know the rest of it. Flee for your life, say the strangers. And then, of course, the two towns on the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, are destroyed. And they look down at Sodom and Gomorrah, and they say the cities of the plain are completely of just a pile of smoking ruins. What happened was some possibly, what's the historicity of this story? Well, there isn't much historicity of this story. It's actually a parable. But we can be sure of this, that where Sodom and Gomorrah stood, there were some pile of ruins, and people would pass by saying, see those ruins over there? Do you know what happened to the people who lived there? And would have told this story. In other words, it's a just so story. The other thing is, of course, it's the salt, and we have what Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt. There must have been a pillar of salt nearby. So you see that pillar of salt? Well, that was Lot's wife. She looked round and she got turned into a pillar of salt. We often explain geographical features in that way. And don't forget, this plain is also the plain of the Dead Sea. It's a salty desert. There's lots of salt there, and there's lots of funny outcrops of rock and so on. It is a wild and desolate place. It looks as though it's been cursed by God, and therefore the story's arisen that the people there were particularly wicked and were cursed by God. Incidentally, there are lots of stories about places throughout the world where this same sort of story is told. Oh, that was a place where people were cursed by God for their wicked behavior. So that's a story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The moral of the story is, let's be kind to each other. Let's welcome the stranger. All the very best. Bye.